Well, let's get straight into our Monday night panel. I love catching up with these two. Mixed Mornings host Katie Woolf joins me from Darwin, and Ali Clark, Mixed Breakfast host, joins us from Adelaide. Let's start with you, perhaps, Ali.
Guys.
You're in Adelaide. They have reasonably loose drug laws in South Australia as well. As a former South Australian, I can say that. But what do you make of this idea that Canberra is going to allow this personal drug use in the way that they're going to do it?
It's kind of unbelievable, right? And for all of those reasons that you just said, Steve, because again, if it was my kid that was going out to police this, if it was my child who was going to be the nurse to try to deal with it, it just seems like we're waving the white flag and saying, away you go, do what you need to do, when really that is not okay in a reformed and educated society.
Katie, I mean, Darwin's a frontier town, and there are issues in Darwin, as we know, particularly in regard to the use of alcohol. But what do you make of this idea that, all drugs are okay if it's small amounts and go your hardest?
I reckon this is wild, Steve. I cannot imagine what would happen in the Northern Territory if we did the same thing. Like, we've already got serious issues with crime in the NT because of things like alcohol, but also things like meth are a major concern as it is. And the issue that I've got as well as a parent is that if people are just able to sell these kinds of drugs and able to have them out on the street and there's not actually a deterrent, well, what's stopping them from selling those drugs to young people and getting young teenagers hooked on these things that are actually really bad for you? There needs to be a deterrent, and it needs to be strong, because you do not want to pretend that these drugs are okay to have out on the streets.
But the other thing, Ali, also is, look, Canberra's a sort of an island, but it's not an island that is separated by the ocean. It's an island separated by a line on a map. And so you've got this catchment area of major regional towns around Canberra. This is going to become, is it not, I'm not exaggerating here, I don't think, it's going to become a honeypot effect.
Yeah, of course. And we hear a lot in South Australia about some of our regional towns, and then into Victoria about how drugs are really infiltrating Mount Gambier, Murray Bridge for us. So it makes it so much easier. Why are we making it easier to get your hands on this stuff? Because this is the stuff that you get hooked on very easily and very quickly. So why would we be making it as easy as this for anybody to get their hands on it?
Yeah,
it just doesn't seem to make sense. Let's stick with Canberra and politics for a minute. The PM, Anthony Albanese, under fire. He's taken 18 overseas trips in 18 months. Now he's off to China. Now, I don't think anyone could probably criticise him for going to China, but the PM says he's not travelling for the sake of it. Is he leaving the country too often, given the problems we have at home here, do you think?
I reckon there's got to be outcomes, right? Like, there's got to actually be outcomes from these trips when he does travel away, and he needs to still be able to answer questions about what is going on in Australia as well. We know that we're suffering through the biggest cost of living crisis that I think I've ever experienced as an adult. So I think he has to be coming back with tangible outcomes from those trips, because let's face it, they are incredibly expensive. It's incredibly expensive to have your Prime Minister travelling overseas. Now, I do not believe that we need to stop it from happening, but there needs to be outcomes, and he needs to be clearly communicating those to everybody around Australia. But while he's gone, you still need to be able to get on with business. You still need to make sure that you are working on those different measures to do things like lower the cost of living, because I tell you right now, most Aussies do not care what you're doing over in America. They want to know how you're going to bring down the price of power, and they want to know how it's going to be easier for them, to find a rental property and things like that.
Ali, what do the people of South Australia make of the Prime Minister's travel trips away and the amount of times he's out of the country? Do they accept, the people that listen to you, do they accept that he needs to be, as the PM, out there travelling and selling the Australian message, or would they rather he be back home here trying to sort out some of the issues we have, particularly issues in regard to things like cost of living?
Yeah, I mean, this is not ignoring the humanitarian crisis. This is not ignoring global pressures that are pushing up inflation. So there is an understanding that, sure, as our leader and figurehead, he needs to be at these meetings. But at the same time, I reckon COVID taught us how to do some pretty good Zoom calls, and it can be pretty effective technology. So when we're all standing in the line at Woolies or the supermarket and we're paying, hand over fist for stuff that we can't really afford just to be able to put it on our table, it's going to come down to the optics on this and whether or not he can save us back here, because that is obviously physically, but it seems a long way away for so many of us here that just really trying to go day to day.
Given you both live outside of the big capitals of Sydney and Melbourne, I'm really interested to get your view on this debate we're now starting to have about the level of migration we should or shouldn't have. We've had a record surge, 352,000 migrants arrived between January and August this year. That's a hell of a lot. A lot of them international students, so that's slightly different, but it does put pressure on housing and the cost of living. I was talking about this issue today. I mean, you're both ideally placed here, Darwin and Adelaide. I mean, I grew up in Adelaide, so I know that can grow. It's a city that should be growing, and Darwin certainly is one that should be growing. Let's start with Adelaide. Should we be getting more of these migrants that come to the country to go to a place like Adelaide rather than settling everyone in Sydney and Melbourne?
Yeah, well, we're hearing non-stop about how we're trying to sell ourselves internationally and even domestically, but certainly internationally as an education hub. And our state government has been very, very strong in setting ourselves up with things like our space station NASA and hubs of technology and everything here. We're also going through, even a massive amalgamation for our major universities with all of that to try to get more and more international tourists to look at us here. Now, yes, it is driving up rental prices. Yes, we do have the lack of housing, but certainly not to the levels that Sydney and Melbourne and what we sit across the border and watch. But I feel a little bit like a broken record here. Every time a decision about something like this is made when it comes to migration, it can't be made in a bubble. It has to be made with longevity in it to see how these flow-on effects are going to play out and who they're going to displace from, Australians who can't actually find anywhere to live.
Yeah.
Katie, Darwin, does it need more people?
Yeah, we do. Look, we've been trying to grow our population for years, and we've also been trying to fill workforce shortages for years. The issue that we've got, though, in the Territory is we need places for people to live when they do come here, either to work or to study. But absolutely, I actually reckon the federal government, they should have some time ago looked at introducing some different measures so that when people do come to Australia, that they do spend time in the more regional locations around Australia where there is an actual workforce shortage. I don't think that it's good enough to just have people moving to Australia or coming here to work and going to those major capital cities when then we have got workforce shortages in regional parts of Australia, whether it be, still capital cities like Darwin or Adelaide, but look at more regional and remote locations around Australia. They're screaming out for nurses in hospitals. They're screaming out for police. They're screaming out for people to fill some of these skill shortages. So why have we got everybody moving to the capital cities when we know that that's having such a big impact on those capital cities, those major capital cities? Let's think about this a little bit differently.
Well, I mean, that's what we used to do. I mean, post-World War II, you two are both too young to probably remember this, but all of the migrants that came out of here, a lot of them from Italy and Greece and from Yugoslavia, I mean, many of them settled up on the River Murray, outside Albury, Wodonga and places like that, set up the tobacco industry, and many have stayed there forever and raised families and grandchildren. Why do we have to jam everybody in to Melbourne and Sydney? I mean, why can't we have a sensible, mature debate about populating those wonderful places where you two live? I mean, let's start with Adelaide.
Yeah.
I mean, Adelaide is probably, when I grew up there, I mean, we were nudging 1 million people. It hasn't gone up much more than that, has it?
No, it hasn't. And we do want and need more people, just like Darwin was, just like Katie was saying, as do our regional areas. But, you know, the discussions and the processes have to last longer than an election cycle, right? You know, you've got to be able to do these things and get the skills that you want into the areas that you need. But that's not necessarily going to give you the headlines and maybe a win in the poll that you're trying to win that next year or the year after. So there's absolutely answers to be done, but it's got to be done with bipartisan support that will be able to show that longevity. Otherwise, you end up having programs cut, started, and we all end up in a mess.
Well, Victoria, talking about messes, both of you, scrapping public drunkenness, and when do the laws actually come into place? When do they become law? Well, some bright spark in the Victorian government thought, why don't we start the public drunken laws being scrapped on Melbourne Cup Day? That'd be a good day to do it. Drunks will be taken to a sobering up centre in Collingwood. The only problem is it's not open, it's not being refurbished yet, and it's weeks behind schedule. And so the whole idea that we were going to put these people into this drunk tank is not going to work. I mean, what sort of lunatic in government comes up, Ali, with the idea that Melbourne Cup Day would be a good day to stop the law of public drunkenness?
Look, doing something that is medically informed and having different systems, I am absolutely all for. But on that day, I mean, and although I will go into defence of any tall women like myself who just can't walk in high heels, and Katie, you've seen me, I'd actually do take them off and carry them in my hand, but I'm not drunk. So I just want to put that out there. Not all women carrying heels need to be sobered up. We're just not good at it.
That's a very good point to make, I think. I mean, Katie, let's turn our attention, speaking about people doing the wrong thing publicly in the streets. The government in the territory is paying private security firms millions of dollars to patrol the streets. Have a look at this promo from the ABC.
Can we have the police to the Catherine Hotel, please?
I thought I'm gonna die.
Damage control.
I feel like it's private policing, and I think that's hugely alarming.
We're not police officers, we're just chucked to do what police should be doing.
The private guards controlling the public.
Katie, what the hell's going on?
Well, you've got to ask yourself what's going on the streets for us to actually need private security to be patrolling various areas around the Northern Territory. And I tell you what's going on. The government's lost control. They have not got enough police on the beat to be able to do those kinds of patrols. So what they've had to do is obviously get private security. They've contracted private security firms to be able to patrol different areas where we do have hotspots for crime and antisocial behaviour. And we were talking before about decriminalising alcohol. Well, I'll tell you right now, that's what we've done in the Northern Territory, and it is having an absolutely adverse impact. You know, we've got some really serious stuff that's happening on the streets in our CBD, for example, in our northern suburbs. Now, when I say serious, I'm talking like women being sexually assaulted in broad daylight. That is allegedly what happened just a couple of weeks ago in our CBD. Now, they're the kinds of things that are going on, and that is why we've got private security operating around the NT. So, you know, while I understand that Four Corners is obviously looking for a headline, they're flying in, you know, they're coming and taking a look at things for a few weeks and then they're flying out. I've not seen all of the vision that Four Corners has obtained, and I do not condone in any way, shape or form bad behaviour from security towards people of any race, but you've got to really seriously be looking at why we have got private security patrolling the streets in the Northern Territory, and it's because things are out of control.
I just love catching up with you both whenever I fill in for Chris. Katie Woolf and Ali Clark, great to see you both again. Thanks very much for joining us tonight.